Hello, this is Kris Nelson of evolveconsciousness.org. I'm going to be doing a presentation I've titled Natural Law, the Science of Morality, Part 1, Rights. This is the first in a series of presentations that will outline as much information as I'm able to at this point about natural law, the science of morality. I expect there to be maybe 4 or 5 parts in total. So let's get into it. What are our rights? What is a right? A right is an action that we have a right to do. It's right, not wrong, behavior, moral. We have the right to drink, eat, walk, jump, breathe, speak, etc. Since there are nearly an infinite array of possible actions we have a right to do, knowing all our rights in the positive sense, quote, the right to do X, is not practical. Instead of asking what is a right, what isn't a right, a wrong isn't a right. We don't have a right to do wrongs. What are the actions we don't have a right to do? Positive rights also have a dangerous, wrongful application whereby someone believes they have a right to be provided with something, like the right to housing, water, food, employment, X, substitute whatever you want there. This is not a true or natural right. This forces others against their will, that is to say violence, to be obligated to provide X to others. No one has a responsibility to provide you with any positive right. Everyone is responsible for their own actions and not to infringe on or violate the rights of others. You don't owe anybody anything other than not violating their rights. What is a right? The apophatic path. To better understand what you have a right to do, you need to understand what you and others don't have a right to do. This is apophatic knowledge of rights. Apophasis is affirmation through negation, to arrive at knowledge of what something is by way of negatives, by what it isn't. We can gain knowledge of something by gaining knowledge of what something is not. To know rights by what you and others don't have a right to do. This is a negative right, what we each have a right not to have done to us. Understanding what wrongs are leads to the affirmation of their opposite, rights. What don't we have a right to do? Behaviors that initiate harm to others. Initiating harm is a wrong, not a right. Wrongs initiate harm because they are behaviors that infringe on the property of others. A wrong, the initiation of harm, is a violation of a right. It's an attempt to deny someone the right to own or use their rightful property. What is a wrong? This is an introduction. I won't go into full detail. That'll come later. Wrongs, that which we have no right to do, are actions that initiate harm. There are 7 major greater types of wrongs. All initiations of harm are forms of stealing. Wrongs boil down to thefts, stealing. For a theft to occur, some form of property has to be taken. Thefts are violations of property and ownership. Property and ownership are rights, something one has a right to do, so long as the acquisition of property and ownership doesn't initiate harm. This is part of rightful property ownership. Stealing is a wrongful or false ownership claim. To better understand wrongs as thefts, we need to know what we rightfully own that can be stolen, because we rightfully own it, which means that it can be stolen. by someone violating our rights, because acquiring and owning it didn't initiate harm. That's how we know what we rightfully own. Because to get it, we didn't initiate harm. There are basic ownerships inherent to each individual being by virtue of their existence and willful agency. Ownership and property. Do you own yourself, or does someone else own you? You direct, control, rule, and govern your actions/behaviors. No one else has control over your body. You have autonomy. You govern yourself. You don't have a right to govern others. Others don't have a right to govern you. You own you and decide what happens to that which you rightfully own. Rightful property. This is the self-ownership principle. Your actions can rightfully acquire property through original appropriation or voluntary exchange. Original appropriation is being the first to mix your physical labor, that is your actions, with unowned resources in nature. Mixing of your own personal labor is required. Otherwise, you can falsely, wrongfully, claim ownership of anything, anywhere. So if you just imagine that if you're not mixing your physical labor, putting energy, applying force, legitimate force, moral force, to mix part of yourself, your action, your energy, your physical labor, with unowned resources in nature, then you can just claim anything you want. I could claim that I own a tree, or own a lake, or own land in any amount of size, in any quantity I want, anywhere on the earth, just by making a claim. But is it a true claim? No. It's a false claim. This is why it's rightful property, which is coming up next, so I think I'm jumping the gun here. Voluntary exchange is non-coercive action. You have free will volition to control your rightfully acquired property. Modification of property or transfer of ownership requires voluntary agreement from the rightful owner. All bodies, animals are the ones who have bodies, are a priori owned by their natural owner, their consciousness, that controls, through their will, their own body. Only unowned natural resources can be acquired as property under original appropriation. Self-owned bodies cannot rightfully transfer ownership of their bodies. It means you can't transfer ownership of your body to someone else and become a slave. The natural a priori owner forever controls their body. This is the first natural right that the other property rights derive from. Natural property rights are an inherent birthright that exists by virtue of our existence. We exist in nature, with self-ownership as a property or attribute of that existence. It can't be taken away. Your rights cannot be taken away. Your self-ownership cannot be taken away. It's inherent, it's an attribute, a quality, a property that's part of your very existence. Respecting the autonomy and property of others is to live by the non-aggression principle, NAP. To not initiate aggression against another's property. Aggression being an uninvited, unjust, and undue threat of or actual physical obstruction of what one has a right to do with their property, with some exceptions for unrectified injustices, which I'll get into shortly. Violations of the NAP open the doors for enacting the self-defense principle. Physical intervention, obstruction, or interference of the one doing the violating. That's what the self-defense principle is, or SDP for short, just like non-aggression principle is NAP. So here's the part on rightful property, which I jumped the gun a bit earlier. We have to know what we own and don't own rightfully in order to have legitimate claims of ownership. In order to have legitimate claims of rightful property ownership, there are some principles to adhere to. Number 1, rightful possession. Property is acquired without violating rights, which is initiating harm, without initiating harm. That's done, as previously mentioned. One method is original appropriation, where you mix your physical labor with unowned natural resources, and then that becomes your property because it's the fruits of your labor. Or B, voluntary exchange. And that's what voluntarism is, and voluntarism is another word for anarchy, which is to not be a ruler and not be ruled by others, not be a slave and not allow slavery. Number 2 is to control the usage of your rightful property. So you can sell, which is a permanent exchange, or rent, a temporary exchange, your rightful possessions. This is an example is an area you use and put to use for your living. So to expound upon that, claiming ownership of large bodies of water or land is beyond your ability to mix labor with or claim usage of, and deprives others of the ability to do that. It deprives others of the ability to engage in original appropriation, to mix their labor, and then claim usage of. See, someone could just claim ownership of the whole earth, and then everyone else can't own anything. No one can go mix their labor with anything, with any of the natural resources on this planet, because someone makes a claim that they own the whole world, or a country, like governments do, or hundreds or thousands of acres or hectares. You can't mix your labor with all of it. You can't claim usage of it all. You can't even control all the usage of it. And by doing so, you're depriving others of the ability to actually live free. Because what we live in is a system of enslavement where you can't actually exist outside of you can't operate outside of the confines of the fabrication of a monetary system controlled by a ruling class which manipulates that monetary system, prints it out of thin air or digitizes it out of thin air, inflates it, creates a hidden tax, devalues the currency, devalues the previous voluntary exchanges that you engaged in to either sell or rent the things that you've rightfully come to acquire and possess and have ownership of. So we can't actually be free because we can't just go out and mix our labor with the land, build a house or whatever, and just live. We can't live. We can't just live like any other animal on this planet. The human animal is deranged. That's what it is. We are deranged. We are insane in the way we do things. Because the claims are wrongful. It's wrongful claims of property, not rightful property. And then when you do manage to voluntarily exchange and buy some land, you're still not free because you still don't actually own it. Because whatever municipality you're in demands property tax. So you're never free in the system of living that we currently have as our condition or state of living. I'll move on to number 3. Rightful property is to maintain responsibility for what happens with that property and to that property. For example, your body's behavior and the consequences they create. Your behavior has consequences that affect others in reality. If you use property to create further effects that affect others, well, if you're initiating harm, then you're responsible for what your property did while you were in rightful possession and controlling usage of. So others can't decide what happens to your property, such as your phone, your car, your knife, your gun, or whatever else. Otherwise, they're making a claim of ownership upon your property and, by extension, a claim of ownership upon you, which we'll discuss further in this presentation and in upcoming ones that go more into slavery and freedom. And a third example that I want to clarify is that if someone steals your property, someone stealing your property is responsible for what they do with it. Because you were in rightful possession of it, but then someone stole it, so they engaged in a wrongful acquisition and possession of property, but they were still in control of it at that time. So when they stole it, they were assuming responsibility for what happens to it. So if someone steals your car and has a car accident, you're not responsible for your car getting into an accident because you were not the one driving. Someone stole it. They made a false claim of property ownership. And then whatever happened with that when it was under their control is their responsibility. Property rights and wrongs or violations. Negative rights are what you have a right to not have done to your property. Anyone who infringes on these rights is trying to make a claim of ownership upon your property, which is ultimately derived from your first natural right of self-ownership, making it a claim of ownership upon you. That is to say, slavery, evil, or the destruction of freedom. I'll be getting into this more, as I said in the previous slide, when I get into the presentation on slavery and true freedom. But I can quickly, that should pretty much explain it, because everything is derived, as you'll see here, from your first natural right of self-ownership. So whatever you voluntarily exchange or acquire through original appropriation, or as part of a direct extension of your body, such as we'll see here on the right side, your property rights, by default, your life, your sexual association, your bodily integrity, your free will choice, which is your actions, your speech, anything you choose to freely do with your body, standard property, which is not yourself, so external to yourself, so a phone, a car, etc. That's standard property that isn't directly on your self-ownership of your body. Then there's the security of your living domain and the ability to make informed decisions. So these are the main 7 property rights, which is essentially equal to freedom. So if these 7 property rights are respected, what we have, if they're respected by everybody, then what we actually have is freedom, real freedom, true freedom. So if we take a look at the left side, the violations of those property rights, those are thefts, and that leads to slavery. Because as above, what I first mentioned was your first natural right is your self-ownership of your body. And all the derivative ownerships from that, your life, sexual association, bodily integrity, free will choice, standard property that's not yourself, from yourself, and the security of your living domain and the ability to make informed decisions. When someone takes that from you, well, they're making a claim of ownership upon you because they're taking something that you rightfully own and saying they're trying to claim that they have a right to do that. Saying that they have a right to take ownership of, for example, your life or your body, to prevent you from acting in certain ways, to prevent you from speaking. So by extension, that's a claim of ownership upon you, because all those things either are part of you as an individual, as a body, or in the case of standard property or the security of your living domain, it's something that you've either mixed your labor through original appropriation or you voluntarily exchanged for it. And neither of those initiated harm, so it's rightful property. And anyone making claims of ownership upon things that you own are saying that they own you. And that's evil. And that's why whenever one of the 7 aspects on the left, murder, rape, assault, coercion or duress, theft, that's standard theft, trespass, or willful lying or deception, which is a fraud, anytime any of those happens, it's a violation of the right side of your property rights, and it destroys an aspect of what makes freedom possible, and therefore increases the degree of enslavement, either upon you, and if it's widespread, or systematic, societal, in the aggregate, then you have enslavement on a wide scale. So these property violations, thefts, that are a form of slavery, are wrong. And a wrong is what initiates harm, is an act of aggression. That is what violence is. That's the definition of violence, is when you initiate harm. And that's wrong. That is a moral wrong. These are attempts to take others' property, to be a ruler or master over others. And that's the opposite of anarchist is an archon. So as Mark Passio coined the term archonist, well, that's a ruler or a master, because someone is making a claim of ownership upon you when they make the claim that they have a right to take your rightfully acquired property. So your property rights are what is right, because it doesn't initiate harm. None of those things initiate harm. The right to not have property taken from you, that's being an anarchist. And when you apply that to others, you don't take property from them. And when we have anarchy, true anarchy, not the false definition of chaos and disorder and mayhem and looting and violation of property rights, well, you have no rulers and no masters and no slaves. Injustice trumps, quote, sorry about that. I'm not used to talking so much, and my mouth gets really dry, and I haven't drank in a while since the sorry about that. Injustice trumps a, quote, right to do, The right to be free from obstruction of what one has a right to do with their property has an exception when it comes to standing or unresolved injustices. So injustices that haven't been rectified or redressed, resolved, and they remain as injustices because justice was not served. So there's exceptions to what you have a right to do when injustices are not brought to justice. The right to travel is an example of a right that can become obstructed when injustice is is unrectified. For example, a police execution of someone, example, Michael Brown, in 2014, I think it was, who doesn't obey their commands, the commands of the police, usually results in low consequences through qualified immunity of the police, with a slap on the wrist in most cases. People unite to air their grievances for the unresolved and unrectified injustice. This can obstruct normal rightful use of property, like travel. But this isn't an immoral or wrongful obstruction of a right. Rectification of an injustice takes precedence. So all the people who unite together to air their grievances, use their free speech, obstruct the normal right to travel, well, what they're trying to do is bring about a rectification of an injustice, and this takes precedence over the normal rightful use of property. Justice was not enacted against the violator who created the injustice. Those who use their free speech to speak about the immorality are working to bring natural law justice to reality. And this is to bring back true freedom. All right? If we go back here, if you have your property rights respected, you have freedom. If that's applied in the aggregate, in the collective, societal, everywhere, what you have is true freedom. And as soon as you have a property violation or theft, that's an attempt to initiate slavery into the world. Well, you already make a claim of ownership, a claim of enslavement upon another's property. So if that's left standing, right, if it's unresolved, then what's to stop them from doing it again and again and again and violating another and another and another and another? And when you just amplify that, well, that's when you get systemic enslavement, when violations persist. They're not just temporary. They continue. And that's the world we actually live in. So to continue, those who don't speak of the violation aren't serving natural law at that moment. Maybe they serve natural law at other moments. But in the case of your normal rightful use of property, such as traveling, you're allowed to use your car, your body, and you're allowed to travel. You're not initiating harm. That's a right. So that rightful use of your property, your body to walk, your car to drive, well, at that moment, there's other people who are trying to bring attention and trying to bring justice to an injustice. So they have a right to their free speech and to inconvenience you temporarily. They're not taking away permanently your right to travel. It's a temporary obstruction. And it takes precedence because at that moment, while you're driving or walking, you're not serving natural law by trying to bring justice to an injustice. You're just on your way doing whatever you're doing. So whatever your destination is, maybe you're on your way to a destination to serve natural law justice against another injustice. Maybe that's the case, but regardless, the people who are actually doing that at the present moment have a higher priority than the unobstructed rightful use of your property, which is a right, and the violation of such a right in normal circumstances is a claim of ownership upon your property, of your use of your property, which is a claim of ownership upon you, saying that you're not allowed to do that. So if you're going to restrict someone's ability to behave a certain way or act when they're not initiating harm, which is their right, well, then you're making a claim of ownership upon them, on their body, because that's where your actions come from. So you're saying you're not allowed to move here or to do this. So you're controlling that person, and you're making them obedient to you. You're making yourself a master and ruler over them, and therefore they become your subject or your slave. And that's not a right. But in this case, their rightful use of property has a secondary priority relative to the serving of justice under natural law. The whole point of what the people obstructing a normal rightful use of property is to cause disruption so that others pay attention to the message of injustice. Here's a diagram I made of trying to just visualize a bit of this aspect of self-ownership and sovereignty, because when you own yourself, you're a sovereign. And I'll get more into that in, I think it's the part 2, which will be about true freedom and slavery. I'll define sovereignty then, but it's essentially self-ownership. You own yourself. Because you own yourself, no one's a master of you, and you're not a master of others. You are free, and that's what sovereign is there's no ruler above you. No one reigns above you, if I recall correctly. Anyway, so from self-ownership and sovereignty, you have property. And these are the 7 properties mentioned here. Your property rights. These are the 7 main ones: life, sexual association, bodily integrity, free will choice, standard property, security of your living domain, and ability to make informed decisions. And the violations thereof are murder, rape, assault, coercion or duress, theft, standard theft of your external to self property, trespass, and willful lying or deception, which is a fraud. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those are your main 7 properties. And there's a line. So that line is the barrier or boundary of rights or law. So your natural rights are an aspect of natural law, the law that is natural and not artificially created by diseased and delusioned consciousnesses that think that they can fabricate and invent laws according to their whims, wishes, wants, or desires. So this barrier or boundary of rights or law is essentially saying don't take, don't steal. And you have other people who have the desire to reach ends. When we have a desire to reach ends or a goal, do you verify if that action is right or wrong? So at the bottom on the left, we have someone who has an action to do being evaluated. They have a goal and ends. They're trying to do something, or they have an idea to do something. So they have to evaluate, well, if I'm going to do that, let me think about it. And they come to the conclusion that they're not allowed because the knowledge of right versus wrong, which is morality, is present and the right is chosen. So that's what the arrow going up to the barrier is when they evaluate their action and it hits the barrier, well, that's because the barrier is protecting someone else's self-ownership and their property rights. To not take, to not steal. So they've recognized that they've come up against that barrier, that natural law barrier, that natural law boundary of those natural rights that someone else has, and they've recognized that they don't have a right. They're not allowed. That's because, at least in regards to that evaluation of that action, they have some knowledge of right versus wrong. Some knowledge of morality is present. And right is chosen. Now, conversely, the two other cases are where actions taken an action taken breaches rights or law. So they've breached the barrier or boundary of natural rights and natural law. So instead of don't take, don't steal, well, for some reason, they think they're allowed. So in the lesser case, it's someone who makes an incorrect evaluation, compared to the first person who did an evaluation of the action to do, and they come to the correct conclusion that that action, if they were to take it, would breach the boundary of natural rights, natural law. So they realize that they're not allowed. Well, the scenario in the middle case is they came to an incorrect evaluation where they think, oh, hey, I'm allowed to do that. So they just break through and they breach that barrier or boundary of rights, of law. And that's because knowledge of right versus wrong is missing, in whatever capacity. Maybe they understand that you don't murder, rape, assault, steal, but maybe they did something else. Maybe they're restricting what you have a natural right to do because you're not initiating harm, and they think that they're allowed to prevent you from doing that. It could be any number of hundreds or thousands, maybe millions of things, as rights are nearly infinite. So the knowledge of right versus wrong is missing. The knowledge of morality of this particular instance that they've tried to evaluate, where they think they're allowed, but they're not, well, that's missing. So in this case, they can't truly choose the right versus the wrong, because they're missing that knowledge of right versus wrong. So when you're missing the knowledge, the knowledge of the objective difference between right versus wrong, then you're not able to choose you're not able to choose right, because the thing that you're choosing that you think is right is actually wrong. So you're not truly choosing. You're making a choice, but it's the wrong choice. So even worse than that is the case on the right, where they're not even evaluating. They just want, and they take. I want that, I'm taking it. And they just breach. They go right by. They shatter, break the barrier boundary of natural rights, natural law, and they take and they steal because they want it. So they're essentially ignoring right versus wrong, even if they have that knowledge present. Maybe this person knows every single thing about natural law, natural moral law, morality, but they're choosing to ignore it. They're not choosing the right over the wrong. They're ignoring right versus wrong and the responsibility to choose the right over the wrong. So that's my little description of how this plays out in the world in like 3 scenarios that I could think of, like just general scenarios of how to envision how each one of us is behind a barrier or boundary of natural rights and natural law. And it's like a shield on us. It's a shield. You can imagine it as a shield. And some people don't breach that barrier, that boundary. And some people do. And some people do it because they're missing knowledge, which means they're ignorant in some capacity, ignorant of the knowledge that they could gain, while some other people is not that necessarily they're ignorant of the knowledge, but they ignore right versus wrong. It could be that they don't have the knowledge either. And obviously, if you don't have the knowledge and you're ignorant of the knowledge, then obviously you're ignoring right versus wrong anyways. When you say you want something and you take it. So you're not really evaluating. So rights are essentially infinite and wrongs are finite. You can do a lot with your property governed by the self. By contrast, there are 7 core property violations to avoid in order to live within your rights. Those are the 7 mentioned before. So rights are, you do what you want with your property while not initiating harm. And the wrongs are murder, rape, assault, theft, trespass, coercion or duress, and willfully lying or deceit, which is fraud. So that's a tiny sliver in terms of the infinite, like nearly infinite. Obviously, it's not purely infinite. That's like a very abstract concept, but it's nearly infinite. You know, you'd have a hard time. That's why in my first slide here, that's why I say we're not going to look at what our rights are in the positive sense in terms of every single thing that we have a right to do, because it's nearly infinite. I have the right to jump. I have the right to put my foot to the left, to put my left foot to the left, to put my left foot to the right, to put my left foot forward, to put my left foot back, and my right foot. And you can describe an infinite amount of things that you have a right to do with your property as long as it doesn't initiate harm. So those are the 7 property violations. Those are violence. They're wrongs. They are immoral. It's always the wrong thing to do. So your actions that one has a right to take, now this is an important clarification, caveat that needs to be understood, which I think I get more into in the next presentation, because I have done dozens and dozens of images, infographics. I just have to make them prettier, make them pretty, organize them in order, because right now it's just black text or diagrams or flowcharts on white backgrounds, and so I have a lot more work to do to make all the next presentations for natural law, the science of morality. And basically what I'm getting at is you don't necessarily, all these actions are not necessarily the right thing to do. You merely have the right to do it in morality level 1. So I'm not gonna hint at what I'm gonna get at. I'm just gonna leave it for when I get to it. I'm just mentioning it now just so that I'm not leaving any contradictions in the future work, which will contradict an earlier image where I stated something where, oh, it's an action you have a right to do. And then when I clarify it later, I'm going to say, yes, you have a right to do it, but it's not necessarily the right thing to do. So we'll get into that in the future, in future presentations coming down the line in 2023. But there's a distinction between what you have a right to do and whether it's the right thing to do. So I'll just leave that there. Categories of wrongs or violations. Self-ownership is the first property one owns, and that's your body or your life. Other properties are derived from self-ownership, either through original appropriation via labor or voluntary exchange. Freedom is the right to do what you want as long as it doesn't infringe on others' rights to do the same. So they can do what they want as long as it doesn't infringe on other people's rights. And if everyone operates according to this rule set, these rules of conduct, this natural law, natural moral law, morality, according to your rights, operate within your rights, within that boundary of natural law, the boundaries and barriers of your natural rights, then what we get is freedom. You have freedom, I have freedom, everybody has freedom, and boy, would that ever be good to live in, but that's not the world we have. Those who violate that right are violent, creating evil, destroying freedom. Evil is the destruction of freedom. And I forgot to mention, that's a quote from, well, I don't know if it's a direct quote, but from End of All Evil by Jeremy Locke. Great little book. Good reading. But that's what it is. Evil is the destruction of freedom. Because evil, going back here, that's what slavery is. Slavery is evil. When you violate someone's property rights, you're making a claim of ownership upon their property, by extension, upon them. And that's making a claim. Obviously, it's a false claim, because no claim of slavery is legitimate, so it's a false claim of ownership, of having the right to do what you do, to do what you're doing, to violate someone's rights. But you don't have that right, so it's a false claim. Anyways, so this is just how I've categorized the different types of wrongs and violations. I've color-coded them to make them more visually distinct. So so you can see, I'll go for the color distinctions first. We have, in red, we have the physical. So that's related to things that are physically apparent, physically obvious, that visibly physical. You have yourself, and you're not self. Things that are part of your body, things that are not part of your body, that are external to your body. And we also have things that are non-physical, but are part of yourself. And then we have, so there's two different types of non-physical things that are yourself. So in the first category, you have the physical things that are yourself. So that's when your body is violated. So there's out of the 7 main violations, 7 main harms, you have when your body is violated, which is murder, rape, and assault. Now, when it comes to still within your physical being, but not directly, still in the physical world, in the, we'll say the external to, I guess, any non-physical aspects of yourself, which is the 2 later categories. So that the physical part that's not yourself, which is external property, because your body is part of your internal property, of your internal makeup of your body, and your self-ownership, that's part of you. So anything external to you is your external property, and that's what the theft is, the standard theft of your standard property that people normally view as what property is. Because in society, most people don't view yourself, your self-ownership, as a property right. They just don't understand this. Right? Maybe they understand it intuitively in some capacity, some little capacity or whatever, but they don't really understand it at a conscious level. It's not conscious knowledge. So this physical aspect that's not yourself is external property, and that's theft or trespass. And then we get to non-physical parts of yourself, and that's threats to your physical property, which is what coercion is, or duress. Those are threats to your physical property, which are threats to the 2 previous categories, which are either physical self, right? So threats to life is murder, threats to sexual association, rape, threats to bodily integrity, assault, threats to standard property, which is theft, and threats to the security of your living domain, which is trespass. And the final category is, again, non-physical self, but it's not threats to your physical property. This is part of your non-physical self, which is dealing with your capacity to make decisions, And this is the violation of a lie or deception, which is fraud. So do no harm, and this is the least harm principle. Do no harm as the goal for living, with harm as the measure for what a violation is. So doing no harm, the least harm principle, that's what we should have as the goal for living. And harm is the measure for what a violation is. Because initiation of harm is to violate the property rights of someone. To violate the property rights of another. So we should strive for do no harm. Not that it can necessarily be achieved in 100% capacity across any wide spectrum or infinite detail, but it's to strive for that principle of not doing harm, to do no harm by respecting the self-ownership of others. That should be our goal for living, to not do harm. And if everyone does that, then we live in true freedom, and we don't have widespread, systematic slavery everywhere. And to clarify on coercion and duress, so duress is a continuous condition of coercion, of being threatened with violence in perpetuity. So that's forever. So coercion is the theft of free will, executed via a threat or act of violence to get someone to comply against their free will, to be prevented from engaging in their natural rights, or unjustly forced, which is violence, to engage in behavior against their will. An example of that is taxation. So you're forced to let someone steal from you. Because if you try to defend yourself from that natural right violation, that natural law violation, well, the enslaver class, those who have the disease of thinking they have the right to claim ownership of others through claims of ownership of their property. Well, these people, if you defend yourself, they think that you're the aggressor because they're so deluded, so corrupted in their consciousness and in their conscience. They have an undeveloped conscience. They lack a proper conscience. The objective, that's the knowledge of the objective difference between right and wrong. They don't have it, so in their deluded, twisted, demented, degenerated consciousness, they think that they have a right to respond to your right to defend yourself from a property violation. They think that they had a right to do that in the first place, and then when you defend yourself, it's like, well, how dare you harm me? And that's a right to harm someone who's violating your property rights. And then they think that they can even execute you, murder you, because you don't want to let them steal from you. And because you're saying no to the violation of a theft, then they're going to up the ante, increase the degree of violation, increase the level of violence from a standard property theft external to you. Then they're going to bring it directly upon you, right onto your body, either through assault or murder. So this is the mentality of, you will comply with my commands, my will, or you will receive violence. So in the case of taxation, they're already initiating violence, and then if you don't do what they say, then they're going to up the scale of violence. If you don't let them rob from you, they'll kidnap you, assault you, to kidnap you if you resist, put you in a cage. That's violating your right to be free. You didn't initiate harm. It's the government and the police and the military. It's just always constant initiation of harm. That it's insane, really. All of society views this as legitimate. What they're doing is legitimate, and all the bootlickers that just bow down, bend over with their asses in the air, licking the boots of all these authorities throughout society. It's not just the police and the military. It's not just the politicians, the fake leaders, the would-be rulers, the self-declared rulers, or the rulers put in power through the delusion of voting. It's all positions where people claim authority in any sector. Look at the medical establishment over the past 3 years. Look at the delusions of authority there. And what they think they have a right to do to people, deny people treatment, even force people to take dangerous, improperly tested, ineffective injections. So coercion can happen in particular instances and not persist. So that's the difference between coercion and duress. Duress is when coercion is the constant condition of life. It's always there. It's not a mere one-time occurrence. It's in perpetuity. So that's what taxation is. And these are, they can be unspoken. It's not an actual act. It's the threat of, that's the threat of taxation, is it? Everybody knows if you don't pay your taxes, taxman's coming after you. And if you don't give them what they want, then they're going to send their goons to come arrest you. And they're going to put you in a cage for you to, quote, pay your debt to society. What a delusional system. It's batshit insane. So everyone has the natural right to defend themselves against and stop this violence. Doing so is called justice. Whenever you engage in your natural right to defend yourself against a violation of your natural right, and as I mentioned before, the exception of when someone is obstructing your natural right to travel because they're actually fighting for an injustice that you're not. They're fighting to resolve an unrectified standing injustice that hasn't been brought to justice. Well, that takes priority over your little right to walk where you want or to drive where you want. But maybe there's other circumstances, but in general, when you have a violation of your right where there isn't some moral issue being dealt with that happens to interfere with whatever you're trying to do, well, you have a right to defend yourself and stop that act of violence. Here's another little infographic to just demonstrate the simplicity of the reciprocity of rights to how we get freedom. As the two most basic rights are that just encapsulates everything in a, maybe it's an overly simplified way, but anyways, it's the two most basic rights are to not have harm initiated on you and to not initiate harm to others. So this again is the least harm principle, to do no harm. So when you're not initiating harm to others, that's an outbound affect of action. The action is the effect, the affect, not affect. The outbound affect of action onto others in reality. So that that oval, is the pool of reality, the aggregate collective of everybody else. So you're not initiating harm to others, and imagine if in return, everyone else operated the same way. So everyone else is another you who's not initiating harm to others, and by consequence, in this feedback loop we have in reality for our interchange and social interaction and cohesion, and what people view as what everyone has, every sane person has as the goal is social harmony and living in peace together. What we have as a result of this feedback of everyone not initiating harm to others is the inbound effect of actions from others in reality onto you is to not have harm initiated on you. And it all starts with not initiating harm to others. If everyone did that, then by default, no harm would be initiated on you, no harm would be initiated on others, and we'd be living by the least harm principle, to do no harm. These are the two most basic rights there are. It encapsulates the 7 main property rights we have. So I guess that's all I have to say about that. It's just a really simplified way of looking at it that visualizes how simple this is to understand, and yet, we're not taught this in school. Most parents don't know this, so they don't teach it to their kids. So we remain unraised, morally degenerated. We're corrupted. We're taught to accept immorality, and that's the world we get, an immoral world, because we don't even know how to live morally, because we're not living in the aggregate, in the collective. We're not living by not initiating harm to others. And we're supporting the initiation of harm to others through government and what police do, and other mechanisms of this aggregate condition and state of enslavement that perpetuates in society, the societal enslavement or systemic enslavement of the system of our way of life. And this is another way I've categorized the violations. So these are the categories, grouping them in terms of physical, non-physical, and self or not self. Just a different way to bring more clarity and understanding of details into different ways of viewing the types of violations. And this is how I view the tiers of violations, which one is more egregious than the other. So like the example of taxation, where they say they're going to steal from you, but if you don't let them, they're going to up the ante and increase the tier. So they go from tier 2 to tier 1, as I'll explain here. As you can see, tier 2 has theft and tier 1 has murder or assault. So tier 1 is, going back to this one, is your physical self. That's directly your physical self. That's the core part of the integrity of your being. If your life is taken, or your body is so damaged that you die or you're raped, that's your physical body. That's the first natural right, as I mentioned, I think in 2 places. One of them's here, your first natural right of self-ownership. Well, that's the first essential violation is your that's like the ultimate violation is your body. So the top one is murder, the theft of your life. And then after that, in my consideration, is the theft of your sexual association. That's such an intense, extremely intimate violation. You're not dead. If you're killed, that's intimate in terms of your life, but it's the theft of your sexual association is such a You're still living, so you're going to get to experience that violation into the future. Whereas if they take your life, well, that's it. It's lights out. You're not going to further have to live with that violation and that experience and the memory and the feelings and the emotion. So the rape is such an intimate, it's an assault of a higher level, because you have theft of your bodily integrity, but rape is the theft of your bodily integrity, but of such a more intimate nature, of such a more sacred nature than just a standard assault. But still, murder, the theft of your life, is still the ultimate one, because that's the lights out one. That's the taking you out of existence one. And then we have tier 2. So these are my considerations, and perhaps others will view it differently in terms of which ones are more egregious violations. But tier 2 is the coercion and duress, because that's theft of your free will choice by direct or implied threat of violence. And the reason that's so crucial is because it's part of yourself. It's not your physical self, but it is yourself. And what makes it so egregious that I put it as a tier 2 is because free will choice, that's what they're violating. They're violating your free will. That's an essential component, right? Where did I put that? Oh boy. I'm trying to find... this one, yeah. Right? So your will, you're the owner is you, your consciousness that governs and controls and steers your body. And your will is the mechanism by which you engage in volition through your consciousness to direct your body in certain actions. One of them could be speech. So that's your free will choice. That's a high level violation. That's why I put it at tier 2. Because it's yourself, but it's not your physical self. So you could argue that, well, your physical self isn't the most important, and I'd understand that. But I wanted to make some distinctions of the tiers of violations in order to later on in forthcoming presentations on natural law, the science of morality, to explain that when you're seeking rectification, the redressing of wrongs, that you can't just, in your natural right to self-defense for a property violation, let's say someone steals your ability to make informed decisions. Well, what are you going to do as a consequence? Are you then going to take their life? That seems a little overboard. If they lie to you, and that's already a hard thing to prove, but if you can prove, if you can demonstrate and verify that they lied to you, okay. So they engaged in a violation of your property rights, your ability to make informed decisions. And they've tried to steer you off a congruence and harmony with reality, which is what the truth is. Truth is it's another term for reality, for existence, that which is. So my whole point of this is that these are tiers of violation, and that when you're looking for rectification and redressing of the wrongs in order to bring a payback of justice for the injustice, for that debt that was initiated, that debt that was created, there's a payback. But you're not going to go completely off the wall for someone lying to you and you're going to go kill them. It doesn't make sense. So that's why I'm categorizing them by tiers, so that there's more of a more accurate understanding of the degree of severity of when you're violated, what level of violation that's at. So that's my goal of this. Just to bring more clarification as far as I've come to understand and see things, and what makes sense to me in terms of these are the objective difference between right and wrong, and what is a right and what is a wrong. And when you're seeking rectification, redressing the wrong, at what tier was that actual violation in order for you to bring about a payment of the debt for that violation? You're not going to demand that the debt they owe is their life for lying to you. Right? It makes no sense. So that the tier 2 is coercion and duress, because it's the theft of your free will choice by direct or implied threat of violence. So they're robbing your free will choice. So that is pretty grave. But for me, in terms of a payback, I haven't worked that out yet, but you can't just go completely off into the extreme. Like, you're not going to say any of the 6 violations, well, the answer is they owe you their life. Maybe for rape, for murdering someone, yeah, okay, you could say, well, the debt, you stole a life, you owe a life. The theft of your sexual association, you stole someone's sexual association, well, owing sexual association, what, you're gonna rape them? See, that doesn't make sense. There's other consequences that you can apply as a payment for someone who did a violation. They owe a debt. So what does that debt? Well, the people who've been violated, the people who knew them. Like, if you take someone's life, they can't represent themselves, so other people need to represent the injustice, and they can demand payment. So maybe it is their life. Maybe it's, well, you have to do work, and because you owe a debt, well, you have reparations, you have payments of some kind. Maybe it's money, maybe it's something else. Maybe you have to go work. I don't know. You go and you have to grow food, and you have to give your food to people, or the people who've been violent. I don't know. Whatever it is, it's more complex, and I'm not getting into that now. But I'm just explaining the goal of these tiers is to bring more clarity to the different types of violations that exist, and that the severity of one versus another means you gotta look at the severity when you're trying to get payment for the debt that was created. So tier 3 is trespass. That's the theft of security of your living domain. Sorry, tier 2, the bottom one, was the standard theft of your physical property that's not yourself. And tier 4, that's willful lies, deception, and that's a fraud by perversion of the truth. That's the theft of necessary information being misrepresented, which negatively impacts your ability to make informed decisions. If someone is stopping you from violating the rights of another, that's not a violation against you. I can just clarify if that's ambiguous. If someone harms you, like, if you're going to try to steal from them, if you're going to try to threaten them with theft or assault or rape or murder, direct or implied, through coercion or duress, and they defend themselves and beat you down or take the knife or the gun out of your hand because you're initiating harm. Well, the harm that you get isn't an initiation of harm. So stopping you from violating the rights of another is not a violation against you, because you're not engaging in natural rights. You're engaging in a wrong, in a violation. So when you get stopped and you get harmed, well, that's tough cookies. That's the debt. That's the payment. That's part of the payback. Is you're going to get rightful harm for your wrongful harm initiation. And that brings us to the difference between force, someone who's doing something within the rights, and the violence, and then the rectification, the redressing, to bring back justice to the injustice. Well, that's a force. So force and violence are obfuscated and confused, leading to an inhibition or pacification of the self-defense principle. Force is strength, power, or energy. Example, moving a ball. You build something like a house. You speak in opposition to something. Or you're stopping violence. You're using your right to self-defense to stop violence. That's all examples of rightful use of force. Because it's based in natural rights or natural law. It's a right. Whereas violence, it's an unjust. It's not based in justice. It's an unjust exercise of power or force because you're creating an injustice. An example is you're using force to violate rights. That's violence. Using force to damage property. Well, that's violence because it violates natural rights or natural law. It's not a right. When it's a right, it's force. When it's not a right, it's violence. Violence requires force, but force does not require violence. The root of violence and violation is viol. And in French, that's essentially the word for rape. Viol. It's pronounced viol. And that comes from the Latin violare, violare. I'm guessing it's violare. I don't know. I don't know how to pronounce Latin, but I'm just guessing. And that's from vis, v, I'm guessing vis, and that's force, strength. So force is derived from, violence is derived from force, but force isn't derived from violence. Using force against a violator who is creating violence by violating rights is not violence. It's correcting a violation of rights, of morality. The initiator of harm is violating the volition of another to rightfully not be harmed. The initiator of violence is in violation of the sacred feminine non-aggression principle, non-violence. The response to use force against violence is the sacred masculine self-defense principle to stop the aggression or bring about justice to the theft debt the violator created. That's what I've been talking about, the bringing about of justice, talking about recently there, is the bringing about of justice for the injustice, because that injustice is a theft debt. These injustices, these violences, these wrongs, the initiation harm, is a theft of property rights. And that creates a debt. So you're trying to bring about justice for that theft debt that a violator created. So either you're stopping it in the moment, you're stopping the aggression then, or it already happened, and you're seeking restitution, rectification, or redressing that wrong to bring about justice, to bring back the equilibrium and balance to true freedom, true order, and true justice. A debt was created, and then the debt has to be repaid to come back to the same position you were in before. I'm going to go more into the rightful use of force versus violence. So on the left we have force. It's the ability to do something, the capacity to cause change. It's energy or power. It's a valid use of force that respects natural law, henceforth referred to as NL. Force can be a response to violations of natural law. I think I'll go left to right because at this point they match left to right. So in violence is the abuse of force. It's an immoral use of physical force, such as to coerce or compel. So force is a valid use of force that represents respects natural law, and violence is force used in violation of natural law. Force can be a response to violations of natural law, whereas violence initiates an action that violates natural law. Force is a right, not a wrong, and violence is not a right, it is a wrong. And force can be any degree of force to stop physical violations. The self-defense principle. Non-aggression, the non-aggression principle, NAP, that's what force is. Anything that is within the non-aggression principle is just force. But when you use aggression that initiates a violation of natural law, well, that's violence. Force has a proper use. Violence is an abuse, not a proper use. Force is where you have a right, is something you have a right to take. An action you have a right to take. You use force to engage in that action. You're using energy and power to do something. Whereas violence is something you don't have a right. It's an action you don't have a right to take. And actions based in force are backed by rights because you possess the right to do it. And actions based in violence are ones you don't possess the right to do. With force, you have a right to stop or put down violence. And it's responsive. With violence, you have no right to initiate that violence. And it's initiatory compared to responsive. One's initiating harm and one's responding. Yes, you can respond with harm, but you're not initiating harm. That's why the whole definition of what wrong is and what immoral is the initiation of harm. The initiation of harm is to violate the property rights of others that they have a right to do. It's you started it, and someone's responding to what you started. So yeah, you can get harmed. If you're the initiator, you can get harmed. That can happen. So just to clarify, as a little example, so two actions can appear the same, such as swinging a fist, but the type of behavior is different. That is to say, whether it's a moral behavior or an immoral behavior. The action, you're taking your hand and you're swinging a fist at someone, well, you can swing your fist to initiate violence versus swing your fist to put down a violent aggressor. So the action, in terms of just looking at the action, it's force used to move your arm to swing a fist and attempt to make contact with someone, whereas one is initiating violence and the other one is not initiating violence. It's a response to that initiation of violence, and you're using it to try to stop and put down an aggressor and make them stop. Or it could be for payback. You know, hit me, I'll hit you back. You don't have a right. So do I or you have the right? Do I have the right to hold someone in a continuous threat of physical, violent action if they don't comply with my will? That is to say, duress. So you must subjugate your will to my will as if I'm a god over you. Your will doesn't matter. You have to subjugate your will. Your will becomes my will. So that's the mentality of so many in this society that think they have this right, that their will become the will of others. I should state that the opposite way. That the will of others will become what their will is. That others will assume that whatever the person who's trying to get you to subjugate your will to my will, which is what happens in coercion and duress, is they're acting like a god, a master, over you as a slave, because that's what you subjugate. That you must subjugate your will to my will. Your will doesn't matter. My will does. You're going to do what I say. And that's saying, I own you. What you want to do? No. You're not going to do what you want to do. You're going to do what I want to do, or else I'm going to hurt you. So do I have the right to say you must beg me for my approval to allow you to do something that doesn't initiate harm? And if you do it without my approval, I will come to physically restrict your movement. That is to say, arrest you, put you in a cage, prison, to put you in a confined space that you can't leave until I say so. So if you try to do what you have a right to do, because it doesn't initiate harm, you do it without my approval, well, I'm going to come and physically restrict your movement and put you in a confined space, and you can't leave until I say so. Well, that's what the court system does. Look at all the cases of drug imprisonment. It doesn't matter what drug, especially marijuana, cannabis. Like cannabis, alcohol is way more dangerous than cannabis. It's way more deleterious to your health, to your consciousness, to promoting acts of aggression. Cannabis is calming, and if you take, it can make you veg out, and you're not going to be very aggressive when you're just vegged out, just chilling or whatever. And again, these are examples of the society we live in, and people don't even think to ask themselves, like, do I have the right to do this, or does someone else have the right? And if they did ask themselves these questions, then they'd realize, well, this is what government does, this is what police do, this is what people in positions of authority do, and that they think they have this right that doesn't exist, and the right that they think they have is actually violating rights of others. It's completely backwards and demented. It's insane. It's suffering in psyche. Psychopathy. That's what psychopathy is. Suffering in the psyche. Do I have a right to say to you, do I have the right to say you must give me 30% of your paycheck, and if you don't agree to me claiming this right, then I will find you, or I'll send someone to find you, and do physical violence to you. It doesn't matter if you agree with what I do with the money or not. I'm going to take it and spend it as I see fit. And that's what all taxation is. Property tax to your local community, sales tax, income tax. It's someone taking your money and deciding what they're going to do with it. And a shitload of the time it's useless stuff. It's not like providing clean drinking water where you can pay a private company. Well, if I want clean drinking water, either I can take care of that myself, or I can pay someone that does it and they provide that service to me. There's no voluntary exchange. There's no respect of natural rights and coming to agreements with people in a peaceful and agreeable manner. It's violence or threats of violence. It's physical violence or threats of physical violence, which is still a violence, because that's what coercion is. and it's trying to get you to subjugate your will to the will of another, they're trying to steal your will. It's a theft of your free will. Because if you don't let them steal your free will, well, they're going to increase what they're going to steal from you. And it could be your life. It could be your free movement, your right to free movement, by locking you in a cage. And if you dare defend yourself, well, then they could steal your bodily integrity, or you're outright just steal your life. Moving on, some more. Do you or do you not have the right to resist and stop someone like this? Must you be obliged to let someone do that to you? Either you accept someone having the, quote, right to make you their slave, or you don't. That's what it comes down to. For all the people in society who never think of these things, do you really think that someone who does any of these three situations, they have the right to do that? Or do you have the right to resist and stop them from doing these things or any other thing? Must you be obliged to let someone do that to you? And if you do, then you accept being a slave. If you think you don't have the right to resist, you don't have the right to stop someone from violating you, and you think you have to let that happen, then you're just accepting to be a slave. You think, in your delusional conception of things, your delusional understanding or lack of understanding, and your deluded confusion, I guess is more accurate, that they have a right to make you their slave. And that's the society we have. So imagine you trying to do this. Imagine you were the one. That's why at the top I say, do I or you? I state the question as do I. So the person who's hearing this or reading this can think that, well, if someone did that to me, would they have the right? And they'd say no. But then you can also switch the position. Well, what if you were the one doing it? Imagine you were doing this. Would someone else not have the right to resist? So even if above you said, oh, well, yeah, if you did this to me or someone else did this to me, then yeah, I have the right to resist and stop someone. I'm not obliged to let them do that to me. So you recognize it when it's your personal perspective, when it's affecting you personally. But what if the roles are reversed? What if it's not affecting you? What if you're the one doing it to someone else? Well, doesn't someone have the same right to do what you have the right to do in the reverse situation? So when someone's violating you, you can stop it. Well, if you're the one doing the violating, then they have the right to resist and defend themselves against your violence. And since no one has the right to do any of this violence, can you, alone or united with others as a group, give that non-existent right to another individual or group to do violence to others? That non-existent right to make someone their slave, or claim that someone is your slave, or claim that you have the right to claim ownership over someone else's property that didn't initiate harm. Someone's rightful property. Someone who did not engage in violence. Can you, or as a group, as everyone in a country, everyone in an area, and everyone in a geographical area, if you can't do it, and someone else can't do it, so if you answer those two previous questions, if If you have the right to resist and someone else doesn't have the right, and if someone else has the right to resist because you don't have the right to do that violence, then how can you alone or a group of people give that right that doesn't exist to either another individual or another group of people to do that violence that we've already concluded you don't have a right and another person doesn't have a right? Well, how can you give that non-existent right to someone else or to a group of people, like government, or in the case of a dictator or monarch or whatever? They don't have the right, or one politician or one police person. You can't grant to others what you don't have yourself. You don't have the right, but you can't give someone else something you don't have. No amount of people grouped together can give, grant, or delegate to others what they themselves don't possess. If you don't have $10, then you can't give $10 to someone, and you can't delegate someone else to use the $10 that you don't have. If you don't think people have the natural right to resist and defend themselves against physical violence or the threat thereof, which is itself violence, then you have an undeveloped conscience and are in thrall. In thrall. And thrall is when you're in a state of servitude or submission. That's when you're accepting enslavement. So if someone... these are questions that can be asked to the normies and the so-called asleep or so-called sheep or whatever. Those people who don't have or lack the full comprehension of the objective difference between right and wrong. Morality. They don't have that fully developed. They don't have that knowledge properly acquired. If you don't think, well, yeah, the point of this is to get them to understand that if you still don't get it, then you are in thrall. You are in a state of servitude, in a state of submission, where you are accepting enslavement, where you think others have a right to make you their slave. And damn, is that ever a sad state of existence to be in. A sad state of being, where you as a being, in your consciousness, your current state of being is that. That doesn't mean you can't change. That doesn't mean you can't become something else. To change and become someone who rejects claims of ownership upon other people's rightful property. Where you reject claims of enslavement upon others. So do I have the right to, or is it wrong to, take something that is yours and claim it as mine? Walk up to you and punch you in the face. Take your life. On the right side, how to know that those are wrongs? Do you just decide this for yourself? And someone else can decide differently? Is that how it works? How do we know that these are wrongs? That I can't go take your life. I can't go walk up to you and punch you in the face. That I can't just go take something that's yours and claim it as mine. Do we just make this up as we go along? I just decided that for myself. How do we know that these are wrongs? Who is truly right about which actions are right or wrong to do? Do we get to make up morality according to our whims, preferences, or desires, or wants, or whatever our predilections are? Or is it that morality can objectively be known? Because those are the two choices. Either those things are wrong because they are actually wrong and they can be known to be wrong, and it's everyone can understand this and can demonstrate it and can verify it, and that's the truth. Or it's not. And one person can decide it's wrong, and one person can decide it's right. One person can decide it's right and that they have the right to make wrongful claims of ownership upon other people's rightful property, that they have the right to make claims of enslavement and try to enslave others through stealing their property. That's what the making claims of enslavement are. They're always false, but that's the claim. When you steal something, you're saying, hey, I make the claim that I have a right to own this. I have a right to enslave you through the theft of your property. So if right, I'll just go to the mid part I skipped over. Do you have the right to steal, assault, or murder? And if you say no, then you're a rational, insane person. But if you say yes, well, then I'd say you're insane. You're either psychotic or psychopathic. So when you have right and morality objectively known, you know what behaviors are right or wrong. But when you deny that objectivity, well, then you're a moral relativist. You think that anyone who thinks they have a right to steal, assault, or murder others is right or correct to think they have that right, while contradictorily accepting, which is doublethink, that someone is right to think they have a right to not be stolen from. So if you deny objective morality, that it can be objectively known, then you're a moral relativist, and that means that you or someone else can think that I or you have the right to go take something that's someone else's and claim it as yours or mine, to walk up and punch someone in the face and take their life, that someone has the right to do that. And that they're right in thinking that's a legitimate thought, that's a legitimate conclusion to come to. While also thinking that someone who thinks the complete opposite, that you don't have a right to take your life, you don't have a right to walk up to someone and just punch them in the face, they didn't initiate harm, and you don't have a right to take something that's someone else's and claim it as your own, someone else's rightful property and claim it as your own. When you're a moral relativist, what you're actually saying is you're contradictorily accepting the doublethink of both these things at the same time. That's what a moral relativist is actually doing. And that's the choice. Either you can be a moral objectivist or a moral relativist. And one is a rational, insane person, and the other person is completely insane, and they're suffering in their psyche. There's a problem. They're diseased in their psyche. Their capacity to think rationally and reason clearly is broken. It's there's a void. There's a gap. There's something missing. You're suffering inside in some capacity. That's a psychopath. Maybe not an extreme psychopath, as most people think of it, but it's psychopathic. Suffering in the psyche. Suffering in consciousness. And if everyone just takes from others without permission, then you have chaos as a consequence. Everyone violates the rights of others. That's what moral relativism is. Because if there isn't a capacity to determine objectively what is right versus what is wrong, then anyone can determine whatever they want and regarding any action towards another is right. And anyone else can also say that it's wrong. And both of them are right at the same time, because it's all relative. It's an insane proposition. Everyone violates the rights of others. You get chaos. And that's antithetical to the goal of social harmony, an order that mostly everyone says they want. And that includes the moral relativists. They claim they want social harmony and order, but their diseased consciousness has created a psychopathology. They're psychopathic in that they're suffering internally in their consciousness without even necessarily realizing it. But that's a state of suffering where when your consciousness is so degraded and degenerated where you can't even think properly, where you think two opposite things are both valid at the same time. And you don't even realize that, and the conclusions that it leads to of everyone violating the rights of others and complete chaos. And that's antithetical to the goal of order and harmony that these people claim and purport that they want to come about in the world. So that's where, when we get to evaluating actions of what has been done in the past, to actually determine what someone did. And essentially the goal is to find who initiated an act of aggression, to see who is the aggressor, who is the violator, and who is the one who's been victimized by wrongful claims of ownership upon their rightful property, and say they defended themselves. Well, you'll know who's the one using violence and who's the one using force. And then we can also know by a proper evaluation of what should be done next, by knowing what was done before, and also in new situations that aren't directly tied to conflicts in the past, is how to go forward. And that's what this was about, is your action to do. You have to evaluate. Are you going to come to a correct evaluation or an incorrect evaluation? A right or wrong evaluation? What should be done? What has been done and what should be done? And if I recall my previous work from 2015, 2016, this is what the concepts of, in the Greek terms of synderesis and syneidesis. It's about actions in the past and actions in the future, because we're living and moving towards the future. Our vision, there's always the present, but the future is what we're moving towards the future, so the present always moves towards the future. Or the future moves, we're moving into the future, and whatever we've just experienced becomes the past, but we're always going towards the future. So that's what should be done. So we need to evaluate actions properly, and a proper evaluation of actions requires knowing and understanding natural moral law. That's what the NML stands for. And then looking at the action as a two-people scenario, not collectivist or utilitarian. As this small little chart here that I made is where you have a group or collective. It doesn't have a conscience. So a group or collective doesn't have the knowledge of the objective difference between right and wrong. They don't have conscience, because it's not an individual. Only an individual has a consciousness in order to have conscience within that consciousness. A collective or group does not have a consciousness and cannot have a conscience. So when you identify with a group or collective and you join groups and you subsume your identity within it, again, subsuming is, right, when I said here, you subjugate, well, subsuming is the same thing. You're putting yourself below, underneath that group or collective, and you're being swallowed up by it. It's consuming you. And you become a part of it, and that becomes part of your identity. You assume the group identity, the collective identity, and then you engage in groupthink and in peer pressure. And that's where we conform to the consensus or the majority, because that's what the group is. It's the majority and the consensus, and we just go along with what it is. Go along with the peer pressure. Oh, we don't want to be ostracized by the people who are completely devoid of conscience, not completely, but they have an undeveloped conscience. The people who have an undeveloped conscience, who are degenerated in consciousness, who are suffering in psyche because they think things that are wrong are right, and they think things that are actually right are wrong. Well, we go along with that delusional, demented conception or ideology. So we conform to that consensus trance, to that majority rule. And what that leads to is, as an individual, you become corrupted, biased, mind-controlled in your evaluation of actions. You're not evaluating actions properly because you're looking at it in terms of a collective identity, of being part of that collective, of that group, and thinking like them, being pressured by them, or else you're ostracized, and then you're alone, and that's a very powerful social pressure, and I guess you'd call it evolutionary pressure for survival, because it's less so important now. It's still important for a lot of people, just not for me. But they want to be liked, they want to be accepted by others, they want to fit in, they want to belong. So they conform. They don't use their own consciousness. They don't use their own consciousness to think and reason and contemplate and figure out what is actually the objective reality about something, such as the moral truth of an action or a behavior. So that ostracism, that fear of being rejected, of kicked out, because that's part of your identity. And then you become attached to that identity, and you become attached to others, and you become attached to that ideology that the group has, or the doctrine, or the dogma, or the mission statement, or whatever the so-called quote philosophy, which if it's not based in truth and morality, it's not a philosophy, it's an ideology. Just an idea that rules you. The idea has captivated you. And that's what collectivism is. It's this delusional idea that captivates so many people in our present time and in the past. It's an old mind virus. And that's what utilitarianism too. It's a recent word that was created in terms of human history, recent, I mean. But I'm sure the ideology behind it, of the greater good, has existed for thousands of years. Who knows how long. But this infectious mind virus of utilitarianism, to sacrifice yourself for the greater good, or to accept violations and violence, property rights, infringements on property rights, as being justified or excused because it serves a so-called greater good. But it's not a good at all. These justifications, the utilitarian is just a justification or excuse to violate natural moral law. It's the perception of good, whatever their ends or their goals are, right? Over here. The desire to act to reach ends. We want to accomplish things. We have goals. We're going somewhere in the future, and we're trying to achieve an end. We're on a journey to reach a destination. We have means to reach ends. I forget where I was going with that. But anyways, so the utilitarian, the greater good, it's a false good. It's not an actual good. It's just a perception of how they're trying to justify the acquisition of those ends, of reaching that destination, of acquiring that goal. And then they justify it. And then justification is use, just, from the Latin use, right, just, justice. And fication is from fasci, like fascism. And that's like a bundle. It's to make something, if I'm getting the etymology correct. So you're trying to make a right. The only valid justification is when you're doing something because you're following natural moral law. Well, that's a real justification. Is you've made something that's right. That's my interpretation of it. And then the false justification is, well, your action is being justified because you're trying to actually fabricate a right. You're trying to say that, I have the right to take from someone. I have the right to try to claim ownership of their property and therefore of them, that I have the right to enslave them in some capacity. You're making excuses for your violations of natural moral law. And again, the utilitarian greater good, obviously it's tied to the collectivism. That's what it's all about. It's about the greater good of the collective. And that leads you back again to conforming to the consensus of the majority for that utilitarian goal, because that's what the greater good is. It's the majority, the collective. So that's why I have the sidetrack, because you can have group identity, collective identity, group think, peer pressure, related to whatever the group collective ideology is, and wanting to fit in, not be ostracized, belong, subsuming your will, your identity to another identity and being consumed by it. And you don't even have to pass through utilitarianism or excuse it through the greater good. You can just be totally captured by that ideology or that idea. The idea has you, rather than you having an idea, as the saying goes. So you don't need utilitarianism. That's why I have one going like straight down, and then, well, you can also have utilitarianism included in this to lead you to the same ends of you becoming a corrupted, biased, mind-controlled individual who is incapable of making proper evaluations of actions and behaviors in a moral capacity. So is it right or wrong? And this is where you engage in the two people scenario. You need to ask if the action would be one of the 7 thefts. Is what I'm trying to do one of these thefts? Is it violating one of the property rights? So you got to ask that. And being honest with oneself can be difficult. So you need to reduce the action to only 2 people. And also look at the scenario with yourself in another's shoes. So you can look at it as, well, does someone else have the right to do this to me? Are they engaging in one of the 7 thefts? But then you also need to ask, I need to put myself in that position. And what if I was the one doing it? Or what if I want to do this? Am I engaging in the 7 thefts? Am I violating someone's rights? Can you rightfully take a part of someone's earnings? Can they do that to you? Can you rightfully restrict someone's movement or confine them to a space for not letting you? Can they you? Can you rightfully kill them for defending themselves from you trying to do this to them? Can they do that to you? You're physically allowed to direct your free will to act in any of those ways, but it's not a morally allowed or legitimate action. No one has the right to steal. Rights can't be given, granted or taken away. They are. You can't give someone the, quote, right to do a wrong, nor remove a right you never gave, and you can't give, because you can't give rights, you can't take rights, you can't create rights. They are. Rights are pre-existing, and you don't have the right or authority to grant or remove rights. Individuals with the illusion of authority don't have the right to do wrongs. Ownership property is the foundation. Anything that doesn't steal property to violate ownership is a right. It all starts with self-ownership and the other ownership and properties that derive from your self-ownership, and that's the foundation. And anything you can do with all your property that doesn't steal property and violate the ownership of others is a right. So here I have just two little scenarios of two people, just to make it clear, of examples of breaking it down in a two people scenario. So person one is walking down the street, and person two wants to steal from person one and demands their wallet. And person one can say no to reject their aggression, or they can say absolutely nothing at all and immediately respond in self-defense to the immoral demand, even before person two makes any physical contact. The demand for property is an implied threat of forthcoming physical violence to steal it. Well, they've already stated their goal. They're demanding your wallet. They're stating their intention to take your property, make a claim of ownership upon your property, as if they have a right to do it, as if they have a right to make a claim of enslavement upon you. So you can act right away. You can say no, or you can just up it up and not wait for them to up their side. Because then what they can do is they can, after they demand their wallet, person two, after they demand the wallet, well, they can further threaten person one with their fist, a knife, a gun, by showing them, or pretending they have it, or by verbally stating the threat. The coercion is that person one needs to do as person two says, or else they will harm person one. So they haven't actually physically done anything yet, but they're using coercion, saying, give me your wallet, or else I'm going to up my violence from coercion to assault or murder. And that's the mentality of do as I say, or I will harm you. Comply with my initial violence, or I will violate you more severely. Let me do violence, or I'm going to do more violence. And that's what government is. So person one has the right to use force to stop them at this point too. They can state no again to this coercion before doing anything, but they have a right to use any degree of force to stop the physical violence initiated or threatened upon them, be it with their own fists, a knife, a gun, etc. It's a natural right to defend yourself when someone else initiates an action that violates natural law rights. That's why when someone pulls up a gun, I've seen a video where some guy on a street pulls up a gun on a woman who's there with children, I'm guessing, demanding money or her purse or whatever. And someone stops in a car, gets out of their car, and shoots the guy. And that's a right. You just stopped a mother from being murdered, maybe some children. That's a hero. So you can defend yourself, or you can defend others who are being aggressed, who are having harm initiated upon them. So person one can harm person two, which is a moral right under these conditions. Person two abdicated their right to remain free from harm under natural law by their action of violating natural moral law and someone's rights. right? That's what this infographic here was. This is the freedom feedback. If you violate this, you lose your right to not have harm initiated on you. If you initiate harm to another, that natural right to be free from harm is gone. Person 2 initiated violence, the unjust abuse of force, and will be receiving a just use of force. Person 2 engaged in an immoral use of physical power. Person 1 can respond to violence with the moral use of power. Person 1 did not create violence. Here's another quick scenario. So person 1 is collecting some fruit from a tree. Again, this is two people scenario. Imagine you're on an island and there's a person collecting fruit from a tree. And person 2 tells person 1 that they must give them fruit. And person 1 refuses. Well, that's the fruits of my labor. I wouldn't have collected this fruit. Why don't you go get your own fruit? Well, it doesn't matter. If the other person has issues and they can't get it, they can ask, well, hey, I have this problem. Here, can you give me some fruit, please, please, please? I'll do something else in exchange. See, that's voluntary exchange. But they're demanding the fruit. And then the first person refuses, and then the second person says, well, if you don't comply and give me what I'm asking of you, then I'll chain you to a tree and I'll make you collect the fruit and I'll make you give me a portion of your fruit. And that's saying I'm going to take a part of the fruits of your labor. And that's what we have with taxation. We're under perpetual coercion. We're under duress. And if we don't do what they say, if we don't let them take the parts of our labor, then they're going to up their tier of violation and violate us harder. Person 1 can claim anything they want. Oh, that's a typo. Person 2 can claim anything they want about why they are allowed to do this to person 1. Like, say they want to give to a charity. No amount of claims or attempts to fabricate a right are valid. That's a justification. They're trying to fabricate or create a right. If someone does not voluntarily choose to do something and you coerce them to, quote, give it to you, or just outright take it by theft, that's violence, a violation of rights. And this is the society we have. Most people think that some people have this false right, quote, right, that those who claim to be, quote, authorities are doing the morally right thing. People actually believe that people in positions of authority, whether it's government paid and police, or military, or the medical establishment, or academia, or whatever, that they're doing the morally right thing. Even worse, people think the one being violated doesn't have the right to rebel against the violation of rights that they must accept being violated. That's what we live in. Oh my God, you don't want to be taxed and you're going to refuse? Oh, well, you have to accept being violated. You have to accept being enslaved. And if you don't, well, you're a bad person. You have to do your part, right? For the greater good. You have to pay your taxes for the greater good. At the bottom here, help or charity can't be coerced. That's theft. Doing good doesn't result from doing evil. Violence will not and cannot create the social condition of good or order. Impossible. It's antithetical. I'm going to create good by doing evil. You're going to create good by doing evil? Yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to steal and give it to charity. That's doing good. No, that's just taking things that are stolen. I'm going to help someone with stolen. I'm going to go steal from here. I'm going to give it over here. If you're taking rightful property that's been acquired by someone, that's theft. So that violence will never create what people say they want, the good or the order. All the people who support government, all the people who support taxation, and all the other bullshit. In their deluded mind, again, right here, they've been corrupted. They're biased and they're mind controlled in their evaluation of actions and behavior. In their delusion, they think that the ends and the goal, right, that they want to create, the goals that they're working towards, the ends, the destination that they're trying to reach of good, of social order and social harmony is actually going to come about by either creating themselves or supporting, advocating, and condoning the violence of others. Is just complete insanity. So regarding all this about rights and objective morality, you can accept that. You can think of, where do rights come from? So we'll take the southern path. Rights come from where? Are they created by man? And if you accept or think that they're created by man, then you must accept that they can be destroyed, abolished, or removed by man. Alternatively, rights come from nature. They exist in nature. They come from nature. Existence, God, whatever term you want. It's irrelevant. The point is that either they come from man or they don't come from man. If they don't come from man, that means they come from outside of man. And what's outside of man? External to you? Well, that's reality. That's existence. That's nature. If you want to call that God, call it whatever you want. That's the point, is that it's either coming from man, delusional, psychopathic, diseased consciousness, or, and when I say consciousness, I'm talking about human consciousness, just to make that clear. Either it's created by man, or it's not created by man, and it comes from outside of man. And if it comes from outside of man, that means it's in reality, and it means it's pre-existing there before you, and you can't create it, and you can't destroy it. And that's the conclusion. If it comes from there, man can never destroy or remove rights. So which one makes more sense? Which end result is more legitimate or more desirable to live in? A reality where any one group can deny your rights, violate your rights, or abolish them because they say so? Is that what you think the reality or truth is? Does that create true order? Is that how you want to live? Or is it that any one group can't do that? And that any who try are merely delusional psychopaths, acting as a master or ruler or God over others as slaves to claim the, quote, right to deny or violate actual rights. Rights either originate from man, which means they're subjective and invented at whim, and that's moral relativism, subjectivism, and relativism. Or they don't come from man, and they pre-exist in reality, which means they're objective, and they can be discovered, and they can be known, even if you don't know them yet and you haven't discovered them yet. They can be. They come from nature, creation, God, or whatever term you want to use, which is completely irrelevant with respect to recognizing that they don't come from man. That's the whole point of this, is that to recognize that no man, I'm using M capital as in humans, humanity, human beings. I'm not using little m man, masculine man. This is a man as in any woman, any male, any female. They don't come from any male or any female human being or any other biological being or whatever entity or disembodied consciousness that can exist in the universe or other dimensions, other planes of existence, whatever. I'm not getting into that. Don't care. The whole point is that you recognize they don't come from man, or you think that they do, and you're a subjectivist, moral subjectivist and moral relativist, and that means you're in doublethink and you're completely delusional. And that's all that matters to acquire knowledge of objective morality and be a moral objectivist rather than a moral relativist, is to recognize that either they come from man or they don't. And that puts you into one of either two categories: moral objectivist or moral relativist. One's sane and rational, and the other's insane and psychotic or psychopath. Psychotic or psychopath. Psychopathic. Alright. So, in terms of rights existing in nature, you can actually understand this and demonstrate, and have it demonstrated to you and verify it yourself. So, method one is you start at the individual that exists, and then you work outward from there. So that means you start at the self, the individual, you, or anyone else, and that you have ownership, and you have property, and those are your rights. See, so rights are inherent in existence. They come from the self-individual. They are derived from the self or individual who has ownership because they have property. And then they have rights to that property because they own it. And it ultimately derives from the self, the individual. So you or I, the individual or self, exists in nature. The qualities or properties thereof exist. It's anything that's a quality or a property of you, the individual, that exists in nature. Well, those qualities or properties also exist. So if you have a red apple, well, the apple exists in nature. That's a primary substance if we're going back to Aristotle's metaphysics. I have a presentation I did on that a long time ago. I think it was 2014, maybe 2015. So you have the primary substance of an apple, and then you have secondary. Oh my God, I don't even know if I remember this correctly. I don't know if it's a secondary substance, but you have qualities. So you have the color red of the apple. Well, the color red doesn't exist in itself. It's a quality. It's a property. It's an attribute of that primary substance of the apple. But the red is still there. It's something that exists. It's not there. It's red. The apple's red, or another apple's green. It's there. It's a quality or property of what exists. So you have yourself. You have your self-ownership. Self-ownership is a quality or property of our individual existence. No one owns, that is, no one controls or rules us as an individual because we own ourselves. No one owns, controls, or rules the individual's body, but that individual themselves. You as an individual are the only one that can direct your body. Anyways, in the way things are naturally designed, and forget about the perversion of like say a neural link or a hijacking of your body, of your maybe your subconscious or your unconscious, of your motor functions or the brain stem, whatever controls your motor functions, and they hijack that with technology like Neuralink or brain-computer interfaces of some other kind, and then they're controlling your body. I'm not talking about that scenario. That's a perversion of your natural right. And that's where they make you a slave, okay? But in nature, in reality, in existence, you own yourself, and that is a quality or property of your existence, because no one controls you but you. That's why you own yourself. You are your first property to do with as you please. Your body is your property to do with as you please, so long as it doesn't harm another. Your property exists in itself or as a quality of that primary substance. Again, that primary substance, relative to the apple analogy, is, well, that primary substance is your body. You, the individual self, that's the primary substance. And the quality of that primary substance is a property of it, a quality or a property of it, is your self-ownership. And that is your property. So the property, as something has properties, like the color red, roundness, softness, rough. These are all properties or qualities of something that are contained within a primary substance. Well, the quality and the attributes and properties of your individual self is that your self-ownership, which is property. The property that you own is your self-ownership. And that's all comes from the primary substance that exists in nature, the individual self. And then we have derivative property, which is acquired with your body via mixing labor with natural resources, which is original appropriation, or agreements to exchange goods or services, which are voluntary exchange, or which is voluntary exchange. You own your property. You have rights to use them in reality without initiating harm. Infringing on rightful property use is violence. Property rights are qualities or properties of rightful ownership that exist. So right there, we just went from self-individual that exists as a primary substance, and then qualities and properties thereof, which bring you to self-ownership, and then other ownerships derived thereof from that self-ownership, and these are all forms of property. And then those are rights. So rights are a property. Property rights are qualities and properties of rightful ownership that exist. All of these are qualities or properties that derive ultimately from the primary substance. And each of them, each subsequent layer is something that exists. The self-individual exists. The ownership of yourself exists. That is a property that exists. And that is a right that exists. And so do all other rights exist. So this is how you can understand that objectively, that rights are inherent in existence, reality, nature, whatever you want to call it. Right? They don't come from man. So you have the basic 7 rights to life, sexual association, bodily integrity, free will choice, physical property, the security of your living domain, and the ability to make informed decisions. And that's not all. There's even a second method where you kind of work in the reverse order. So rather than working from the particular individual and working outwards, you can start at the collective universal from a condition or state of reality. So rather than start from you, the individual, and work outwards to other forms of property in reality, well, you start at a condition or a state of reality, and you work towards the individual particular actions that create that condition of reality. is to find what individual particular actions create that condition of reality. So we start from reality and go back to, well, in reality we have an outcome of behavior, such as freedom or slavery. That's an outcome of behavior. Has freedom been created or slavery been created in, say, our household, our community, our state or province, our national state or country, the globe, the planet, the earth in its entirety? What is the condition in those relative geographical scales? Freedom or slavery, that's the outcome of the behavior, because it comes from behavior. That's created by behavior. Freedom and slavery doesn't come about on its own. It's created by behavior. It's not just any behavior, it's a type or class of behavior. And the type or class of behavior is either it's moral or immoral. The moral behavior will lead to freedom. Immoral behavior will lead to slavery. And those are right or wrong to do. So rights inherently exist in reality, because only something that is right can be moral. And that's the moral behavior that creates the outcome of that behavior in reality of freedom. And if it's wrong, that's because it's immoral. And that's the type of behavior that was created that leads to the outcome of that behavior, which is slavery, in reality. So we're working backwards. And we're seeing that ultimately it comes back to what's right or wrong, because rights are inherent in existence, reality, nature, whatever you want to refer to it as. The main point is that it doesn't come from man, right? So history shows us continuous violence, violators claiming the, quote, right to do wrongs, claims of ownership, trying to legitimize slavery, creating degrees of enslavement by claims of ownership upon others' property. That's what's happening. That's what's been happening. That's going to continue to happen until we create true freedom by getting people to develop their conscience. Because right now, the majority of people have undeveloped consciences. They need to develop their conscience. They need to gain the knowledge of the objective difference between what's right and what's wrong, what's morally right and morally wrong. Then when that happens in the aggregate and the collective, then things can change. But right now, as has been and will continue for sure in the foreseeable future, because this is a lot of work to get people to understand this, especially since they don't want to. The voice of truth needs to become much greater in number. So that's what the violators are doing. They're claiming the right to do wrongs. They're making claims of ownership, of claims of ownership upon things they have no right to claim, claims of ownership upon rightful property of others, which is trying to legitimize slavery. They're creating degrees of enslavement by claims of ownership upon others' property. They're trying to legitimize slavery, and they get away with it, so they're creating degrees of enslavement in the aggregate, in the collective, in society, societal enslavement, systemic enslavement, by claims of ownership upon others' property. Now, behavior or action creates the resulting condition of the human world reality. Not just any behavior creates the enslavement, only certain types or classifications of behavior. Immoral behavior, which is theft of forms of property, which is violations of rights. That's the only way it comes about. So to have a violation of right, well, the right has to exist. It's objective. It doesn't come from man. There you go. This is the second method of demonstration, of verification, that rights are inherent in existence and they don't come from any male or female of the species or any other species in the universe or any other entity. Violations of property rights is violence. The more there are, the more false claims of ownership exist as the collective condition. That is to say, aggregate slavery. The more violations of rights there are, the more violence there is, the more that's accepted, the more false claims of ownership exist as the collective condition, which is the aggregate enslavement that we have as our way of life. Claiming to own the property of another is a claim of ownership upon them. That is to say, enslavement. When you claim to own, when I'm saying property and just using it that way, I'm saying it's rightful property. I have limited space, so I don't always say rightful property every time I use property. But it's only rightful property. If you claim to own something, but you acquired it through wrongful property, well, it's not rightful property. So violations of property rights is violence. Oh yeah, I was on the next one. Claiming to own the property of another is a claim of ownership upon them. Enslavement. Collectively accepted immoral behavior leads to the demonstration of the negative aspect of the law of freedom. That is to say, less freedom and more slavery. That's the negative aspect of the law of freedom. You get less freedom, more slavery, because collectively accepted immoral behavior means there's collective enslavement. More slavery, less freedom. Tolerating, accepting, justifying. Justifying. What the hell is that word? Yeah, it's late. It's 2:18 in the morning. I had to wait till everyone went to sleep so I'd have time and quiet to do this, or else I'd be interrupted. I'm going to bed right after. Tolerating, accepting, justifying, normalizing, and standardizing violations of rights is immorality. So when you tolerate, accept, justify, normalize, and standardize violations of rights, that's when in a society, in a community, overall, in the aggregate, as a collective, in a collective of all the individuals together, that forms that grouping order of a state or condition in the aggregate, in the collective state or condition. When you tolerate, accept, justify, normalize, and even standardize the violence, the violations of rights, that immorality, well, you get large-scale enslavement. That's what we have in society right now. The government, the police, there's all these justifications and accepting and tolerating all of this. It's normalized. It's been standardized. It's been a standardized, normalized part of society that it's accepted to be this way. And that it even has to be this way. People even believe that it has to be this way. Again, go back to this one, right? They're mind fucked. I didn't know how else to say it. They're suffering in psyche. They're mind controlled. They're corrupted. The individual is corrupted. They're not able to evaluate actions properly. So all this proves that right and wrong exist. That rights exist. Can't be any other way. And to close, I didn't put all the terms because this presentation wasn't dealing specifically with a complete definition of natural law. I'm specifically dealing with rights. So I took the terms that were specifically defined in this presentation, and terms like natural law or true freedom or slavery I will be defining in subsequent presentations. So these are just a summary of the main definitions that I could think of. I have an error in principle. I'll have to review these slides and correct them for people to access. So property, well, that's self-ownership and derivative properties rightfully acquired. Violence is initiating harm, which is wrongful force, which is to infringe on property. Force is power exerted in reality and can be wrongful or rightful force. Wrongful force is the violence. And rights are do what you want with your rightful property that doesn't initiate harm. And the initiation of harm is the violence. So as long as you don't create violence, you're in your rights. And it's to not have violence. Your rights are also to not have violence enacted upon your property. So you do what you want with your rightful property that doesn't initiate harm, and you also have the right to not have violence as a consequence of that, and everyone doing the same thing. And you have a right to not have violence enacted upon your property, upon you. And you have the right to unobstructed, rightful use of your property, except for that circumstance of, the right of travel, when others are speaking against unrectified injustice, standing injustices. So an injustice that hasn't been brought to justice, your travel becomes a subsequent. You have to wait for the attempt to bring justice to reality, to be done by people either protesting or using their free speech, creating minor obstruction to your way of life and whatever you're doing, wherever you're going. And the non-aggression principle is you don't violate rights, and the self-defense principle is the use of defensive force against violence. And with that, I will say thank you for your time and attention. Take care, peace. My website is evolveconsciousness.org, and my slogan is Truth Unites, Lies Divide, Embrace Truth, Care for Truth. Because that's the way we're gonna get out of this. Right? Truth is what unites. Lies divide us. Falsity divides us. That's why we have to care for truth and embrace it. Whatever it is. Do not reject it. Accept it as the truth. But don't accept it as needing to be that way. The truth can be the immoral condition of reality. But that immoral condition of reality does not need to be what is in perpetuity. It doesn't need to be the truth of the condition or state of our existence or way of life, of our reality forever. It does not need to be that way. We can change things. Will we? Well, that's going to take a lot of willpower by a lot more people, and getting humanity educated, morally educated, to develop their conscience, to gain the knowledge of objective morality, the objective, to know the difference, the objective difference between what is morally right and morally wrong. Once again, thank you for your time and attention. I hope this was informative and you appreciate it. Check out my site, evolveconsciousness.org, for more content related to morality, psychology, thinking, the trivium method, logic, many topics, mostly all about consciousness, morality, the deep stuff. Take care. Peace.